AI Game Changers podcast with Luke Whips.
How did all of this start? Like, where was the initial spark?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think what always motivated me was the question to make things better, like make process better, make things better. That's when I originally started to go into industrial engineering, where it's really about kind of improving production processes. At some point, I was back in high school. I was writing my thesis about Francis Taylor. I don't know if you know him. He was kind of the inventor of the modern factory, so to speak. So he was the guy who took the traditional way how products were manufactured, where you have kind of craftsmen doing one piece, and he came and said, hey, let's cut this thing into different pieces, and there's one guy who does the first piece or the first part, another guy the second part, and so on. And then he came with his stopwatch and said, okay, like the first guy should take 10 seconds, second guy is 30 seconds, and so on. So he was the inventor of this kind of modern management, modern manufacturing. This somehow brought me into industrial engineering, and I was always kind of fascinated by this topic, kind of how you can make things better, faster, more smooth. Then during my studies, I also did a lot of operations research, which is somehow also kind of AI. However, most of the concepts used there is quite detached, right? You talk about how to optimize logistic process, and of course, I mean, there were applications before there was AI and so on. But there were a lot of kind of more theoretical discussions about, okay, how can I optimize this problem, but less considerations for how to do this in practice. But this somehow brought me into this topic of hey, how can we use data? How can we optimize a process? More automatically, and this somehow brought me to this topic of data. So hey, we can use data and make things better. That was my initial way into the broad field, I would say.
So you felt like the more of the kind of original stuff that he was working on was probably a little bit too abstract and a little bit too theoretical, whereas you wanted to really work on something that you could kind of feel and taste and touch, I guess, and you could actually see the impact of your work rather than just kind of talk about it.
Yeah, exactly. And at this time, I think it's also nice to remember the different, let's say, hype cycles. At this time, there was this concept of big data kind of going big. I mean, I guess we all know this. I think it was also driven by Gartner and the 3 V's, when everyone was saying, hey, we have big data, like we need more data, and if we have data is the oil, the new oil, and so on. So we just need to store more data. So that was kind of the initial thing that I found somewhat fascinating. Say, hey, how can we use data to make things better? How can we optimize stuff? That was my initial kind of way into working with data. At this time, I then went to Cambridge, where I also did my master's thesis then on the question how companies using big data and all the different ways how data is generating value. I mean, it turned out that having data is good, but usually not the way how you make money. So I think it's also nice to also reflect a bit on the past, when then a lot of companies started with Hadoop or whatever, building these big data platforms, but at some point realized, hey, okay, having data is nice, but it still doesn't create value. But that was my initial way into it. At this point, I was dealing with business models of different companies leveraging data, which is also an interesting topic to ask the question, okay, what is really the value of data? Because this claim of, hey, data is valuable, I mean, obviously it's not true, right? It's at the first point, I mean, it's valuable if you're Snowflake and you're moving around data and then you're getting paid for it. But if your company want to use it, it's at the first point just costs. So you obviously have to think about the right applications.
Cool. So, I mean, after your time in academia and studying and kind of transitioning away from that more theoretical piece and understanding where your kind of passions and desires lie, I guess, how did that kind of translate into your career? Because obviously you joined McKinsey as a first point of call, right? Which it is obviously an awesome company to join, especially for the first time in industry. So how did that kind of transition into your real production-led career? And what did that look like in terms of your role and what you were working on at McKinsey, generally speaking?
Yeah, so I mean, I said before, I was always driven by this kind of, hey, how can we make things better? And actually for this, McKinsey is a great place because you have a lot of interesting problems. You have a lot of really smart people. So I really enjoyed the time from kind of working in air freight or parcel transport or train or whatever. I mean, you really get in different industries. You have the opportunity to solve problems, which I always enjoyed. So I had a great time there. But still, I mean, a lot of those problems, at least at this time when I was there, I mean, obviously it's also changing, but still a lot of things were kind of solved in a, say, a bit more simple way, which is sometimes also fine. But obviously, if you look at complex systems, sometimes it also helps if you have a bit more kind of complex solutions to complex problems there. So that was the point when I was still part of my McKinsey career. Kind of took this educational leave to also pursue a PhD here in Munich at the Tech University. Kind of coming from big data now. Next hype was AI, so I jumped onto this and basically kind of still explored the same question. Hey, okay, how can we use data now with kind of more advanced algorithms? And then kind of now the time also moved on from, okay, we need data to also we have the right algorithms to make use of it. And companies like Google showed that there is value in it. So jumped on the question, okay, how can companies make value out of the data? Which was a super interesting question, and it's actually a question that's still, I find it still super interesting because it's actually a question that a lot of companies still struggle with, to really ask the question, okay, I mean, I can solve tech problems, but what is the real kind of value coming out of it? So that brought me to my PhD, and then this time I met Andreas, who's the founder of AppliedAI, and he pretty much kind of gave me the opportunity to transfer the stuff that I did in my PhD in a bit more, once again, theoretical way into practice. So really kind of solving the question for companies, how can you apply AI to create value in the end?
Mm. So, and I guess, I mean, honestly, Philip, I think most people that would listen to this podcast will probably understand or know who AppliedAI are and what they do. But maybe just for the listeners out there who have never come across you guys, or maybe just have seen, some stuff on LinkedIn, what's the kind of business model around AppliedAI? Because you guys are Europe's largest non-for-profit initiative for AI applications, right? So, I mean, what does that mean, generally speaking, and how do you guys, what do you guys actually do as an organization?
Yeah, so the basic approach, or the basic kind of mission we're having as AppliedAI is making sure that companies really apply AI. I think we're all in the same industry. So I guess you will also agree that certainly AI is one of the key technologies for the future. And what we see in particular in Germany, but in Europe overall, is there's so many awesome companies out there that are world market leader. I mean, we can talk about automotive OEMs, but also a lot of companies you might have never heard of, world market leader for whatever, kind of selling globally, super successful. Yeah, so we have all of those successful companies being world market leader for whatever, be it automotive, be it something you might have never heard of. But all of those companies kind of face the same challenge. There's AI as a new technology coming, and they all notice, okay, we have to do something, but all of them struggle. And that was the initial point how AppliedAI was set up to really drive the application of AI in the end to help Germany or and also kind of Europe to make this transition to AI. So AppliedAI was originally born within the Unternehmertum. Unternehmertum might be familiar to some people, certainly for those in the Munich area. It's by now the largest European innovation and entrepreneurship center. This year, it's the 20-year anniversary. It's an incredible ecosystem from kind of making students to entrepreneurs, kind of growing startups, but also helping companies. So really kind of closing the full cycle from entrepreneurship education to also the own investment fund with the UVC partners. So within this ecosystem, and once again, it's really an impressive ecosystem that was built up here by at the core kind of Helmut Schönberger, who started this 20 years ago. By now, last year there were over 3.5 billion euros money invested into companies kind of coming out of this ecosystem. So quite an impressive success story. And within this ecosystem, AppliedAI was born. As said, Andreas Liebel, who was managing director at this time also at Unternehmertum, kind of founded this initiative and then brought together different companies to say, hey, let's work on this topic together, because different companies are in different industries, and obviously kind of some applications or use cases are a bit different. But the challenges that the companies face are in the end somewhat similar. So the approach was really to say, hey, let's work on this topic together. So this was what was started some 5 years ago. I joined there like 3.5 years ago, almost 4 years ago. At this time, still kind of rather small initiative. I think when I joined, there was some 10 people or something, like one room. By now we're 60 people working with many of the large German companies like Infineon, like Linde or EnBW. So across different industries and really helping those companies, bringing AI to application. And we're doing this kind of holistically. So we're covering the different parts that we are convinced of that you need to work on if you really want to be successful. And once again, kind of coming back to the point I mentioned earlier, like in the end, the question is, hey, how can I make money in the end? Like how can I create value out of AI? And for this, I mean, like tech is certainly a key problem that you need to solve, but a lot of other problems around it. Like, okay, how can I find the right applications and what are the things I should work on? But also things like, okay, how do I set up the right org structure in a more traditional company to address those topics. So these are things we're working on. Yes, I mean, you already mentioned this. What is quite unique about us, I think, is 3 things. The first I just mentioned, we really kind of combine the different perspectives. So our team is machine learning engineers, ML ops we're working on, but also we are having kind of strategy profiles. So people like myself coming out of consultancies or colleagues that used to work at BCG, for example, can really bring together different perspectives that are needed to drive the topic. Second point you mentioned, our mission in the end is really like driving this topic in Germany or in Europe. So we have an overall non-profit mission driving the topic. The third important point is certainly that we are not doing this kind of independently, but really closely with our partners. So we have this 20 and a growing number of industry partners. Already mentioned some companies, and we closely work with them and really create this kind of trusted exchange, where we also bring together different experts from different companies to advance topics.
And you have kind of 2 sides of the business as well, right? So you have the business-centric AI project side where, as you say, you work with German organisations to kind of advance AI adoption. But then you also have another kind of community-based edge to what you guys do as well, right? Like you release a white paper every year outlining kind of the top AI startups in Germany as well, which I'd imagine you might use from kind of a partner perspective, especially around probably some of the tooling or like open source companies. I'd imagine you have quite strong links with them. But so you have another side to the business as well, right? Which is more ecosystem of what's currently out there from a startup perspective, as well as the enterprise stuff as well, right?
Exactly. So it's I would say it's on like kind of two sides. It's kind of the core for us is almost what we call kind of the platform or like the partnership. But we really also value the ecosystem. So what we're convinced of, and I mean you're not well, you're not German, but many discussions in Germany are quite often kind of focused on Germany, or even worse, there is kind of debates on, okay, should Munich collaborate with Berlin or within whatever state of any state. There is kind of the University of X is fighting against the University of Y because they don't want that the others get some money or whatever. The thing we're clearly convinced of is that if we want to, we're in a kind of global game, and we're not kind of competing with each other here. We're somehow in a competition. I think that's fair to say. Also with the US, with China, obviously, and I think what is clear is that we can only be as Europe. Also kind of make sure that the values we want to kind of hold up, that we can only make sure that we can kind of care about them if we have also the power to design the things we want to do, right? Like if you only have US companies or whatever dominating the market, the leverage for Europe to design things we want to do is obviously limited. So what we really value is bringing up together the partners, and what's important for us is, so if you see that a company has a specific problem and there is a solution provider that is well that has a good solution for this, we want to bring them together. There's no point in kind of recreating the wheel here. So that is really the core what we're doing and the core what we believe. And then the other side, like when we work on projects, this is really when we see that there is a need for solving a particular thing. It could either be when it's more on a strategic side on setting up something like an AI team, an AI COE, or also on the engineering side when we work with companies really on cutting edge topics that are not solved yet. So, for example, we do a lot of projects in reinforcement learning. There's one I can talk about because it's public by now. So together with Linde, the largest global gas producer, we're working on an approach to use reinforcement learning to improve the control of this air separation unit. So Linde is having a simple business model, more or less. They take air. They have this air separation plant, which is in the end the original kind of Carl von Linde process that was invented by the founder. A bit more advanced by now, but still kind of the same principle. But it's quite energy intensive. So the question here is really, how can we use AI to improve the energy consumption here? And that's something where we use reinforcement learning to improve the control of this process. This is one of the things where we work on the solution, because we see that this is something that is advancing the topic. It's also advancing the company.
Yeah, do you know, it's interesting hearing about use case like that, especially in a company like Linde, right? Because, 5 years ago, AI, I would imagine, would not be on the forefront of Linde's kind of technology strategy. And like you can probably agree, right? There's been a distinct shift between the difference of huge tech organizations like Google, Amazon, X, Y, and Z, who are embedded, AI is embedded into their business, right? And they're kind of like AI first organizations. The industry, I don't want to say kind of traditional business models, but I guess they are in a sense, right? But, industry traditional companies who artificial intelligence or data science or, deep tech, generally speaking, is a bit of an abstract concept for them. And I think definitely over the past maybe 2 years, I've seen quite a big shift of companies that you would never think of doing stuff in AI and data science and ML really transitioning into becoming organizations that put that at the forefront of their business model. Because I think there's definitely, I don't want to say fear, that's not the right word, but there's definitely an energy around, if we don't do this, we're going to fall behind in the next kind of 5 years, right? Maybe even sooner than that. So have you, I mean, from your perspective, you get to talk to a ton of different customers on a day-to-day, right? And you're talking to those organizations daily, weekly. So what are you generally kind of seeing and hearing from that kind of market? Like what's your feedback from the customers that you typically work with?
Yeah, so I think the observation that you share is an important one. Certainly, kind of the conversations we're having are changing. How we address this topic is usually kind of looking at what we call the different maturity levels. So we kind of defined 4 different maturity levels, from kind of experimental, where you start trying something out, up to what do you call AI first, right? And certainly there's a shift in how companies approach it. So some 3-4 years ago, kind of most of the conversations were really about, hey, let's explain AI. What is this about? And more this kind of, okay, there's something coming up, but please explain. Fortunately, by now there's some companies also kind of some companies we closely work with that understood exactly what you described. It's like, hey, it's not like yet another technology. It's not something that we can put into our large box of, hey, things we might look at. There is whatever blockchain, there's quantum, there's whatever. Let's have a look at it, and if we are kind of bored, let's have a kind of offsite and talk about AI, because it's nice, right? It's still, I think, for many companies, this understanding that things will fundamentally change is still a bit far away. As I said, fortunately, there are some companies that really understood this. And of course, I mean, I talked about Linde. I think Linde is a great example here, because, of course, I mean, their core business will not be whatever, offering AI products in the end. But I think they have a clear understanding to say, hey, what is our core challenges? What is our core things where we can use AI? And this certainly, I talked about the core process. I would say it's the air separation that is energy intensive, and we need to optimize this. So let's think about how to optimize it. But also, they have a major supply chain challenge, because they take the air, they make the different, like, oxygen and the different gases out of it. They bring it into different cylinder types, so small ones, large ones, and so on. And they need to make sure to serve the customers. And these are the 2 major areas. But say, hey, there we see that AI can really be a game changer for our business model, and where we can do stuff. So yes, I think there is the understanding in many companies that we really need to get serious about it, and do something. Still, I think, particularly if you look at the German market, you have to be a bit more careful. That particularly when you go to what is this kind of typical German Mittelstand. I mean, impressive companies, and those companies, like 500 million to 2 billion euro of revenue. This, 1,000, 2,000 people employed, typically located somewhere, Bayerischer Wald, Schwäbische Alb, or in Ostwestfalen-Lippe. This kind of companies, there is still a lot of discussion still in this. Okay, AI. What is this about? Can you please explain it? And these are certainly the companies that need to understand it.
Do you
but then again,
just quickly on that, Philip? Do you feel like when you work with, especially those, you can say this because obviously you're German, so you can get away with this. But when you work with those kind of traditional German organizations that maybe are family owned, or that the leaders of the business, especially at C-level, they might not necessarily be that savvy tech-wise, generally speaking, right? Because if you've got your business model that's worked for so many years, number one, why change that? But then number two, the people that do have that kind of surface level understanding of what AI does, there's so much fear propaganda around AI automating everyone out of a job, and it's, the kind of classic stuff. We won't go into it, but there's so much kind of fear, agenda pushing narrative around artificial intelligence that you must have quite a fair bit of pushback from the real traditional companies, right? So, I mean, what's the kind of conversation that you typically have with those people? I'd imagine it would be around the educational piece, right? But I mean, what do you see from your side?
Yeah, totally. I think you already kind of mentioned the two main challenges. The one, certainly, I mean, like, if your business is going well, it's always a challenge, not specific for AI, but yeah, I mean, we know all of those cases, be it Kodak or Nokia or whatever. When you say, like, what we're doing is going well, so why should we do something else? And also the second point on this misunderstanding what AI is, and certainly, I mean, the term AI is hard also to understand, because you have this, like, what is intelligent? So people have either this feeling of, okay, there's a robot coming, and it's, well, kind of, this Terminator setting, or this expectation of this kind of intelligence. So it's like, hey, okay, you're doing AI, so I have this problem that wasn't solved for the last 20 years. Take your AI box, give it to us, and let it solve the problem. So that is the one side. Or the other people who said, hey, I did AI back in my studies in the 1980s. It wasn't working then. It's not working now. So yes, I think education is a really important point. It was quite an interesting session we had for the last month. We were working together with a couple of CTOs of this kind of companies I mentioned. So typically, like, a lot of also traditional companies, a lot of companies that you like brands that you would know, but there's typically kind of German Mittelstand, be it kind of supplier for automotive or specific for topics. And it was, like, obviously the people that, like, we offered this to say, hey, we do this kind of upskilling for CTOs. And I mean, those that joined were obviously interested in AI. But when they joined initially, most of them were really like, hey, okay, I mean, you're the AI experts. Please tell us what are the top 3 things we need to do with AI. And this is also something where we typically kind of start to explain, say, hey, this is not, like, we can't tell you. It's something you have to kind of figure out for your business. What is the right application, what you have to do, and it's not that you can take a box of AI, put somewhere, and it's also not done by saying, hey, I hire 10 data scientists. I mean, I think it's good for your business if a company is saying, hey, I have money and I want to hire the people, but obviously it's not enough. You have to create the right surrounding conditions to make useful. To make use of those people and this talent. And this is something, so when we started, it was really like, hey, okay, please tell me what are the top 3 applications or the top 3 use cases I should do. And then we explained a bit of, okay, what are the challenges with AI, and, like, why is it hard to do some of the stuff? And I think at the end they really kind of understood this point of, okay, I need to understand how AI will change my business. I need to understand how I can leverage AI to make my business better, but I also have to systematically build up this AI maturity over time. And I think this kind of educational journey is really key. And I think that's something that is not working well in many companies, be it because kind of the topic of AI is either driven by someone kind of making their career based on it, some consultancies kind of pushing their stories, pushing their products, and quite often it's kind of something sold without the decision makers understanding what's behind it, like what's behind the hype. And you don't have to kind of go that deep into it, but this basic dependency on, like I need data, and the data is in the end then my major challenge, that is having implications from kind of training my models to running it and making sure that it still kind of has the same distribution over time. It's not a super complex thing to understand, right? So you don't have to be kind of a machine engineer to understand this, but you need to understand it to make sound decisions on this stuff. And this is really what we are typically working on with the companies.
I guess it must be difficult, because I guess there are some people, especially in those kinds of organizations, I guess there's probably a percentage of people that don't really, I mean this in the best possible way, but they don't really care how it works, right? They just want to see impact. Then there's another, percentage of people that really care about, how it works, but might not necessarily even have the use case for it. And then there's another probably percentage of people that, can't see the use case and don't really get it. So I think the interesting thing about artificial intelligence, generally speaking, is it's so ambiguous, I guess. And from company to company, the use cases, applications, and impact of AI is just so vastly different, right? And I think it's interesting what you say about, CTOs and, people at those kinds of levels just being like, right, what's the top 3 use cases we can do? That's kind of the equivalent of a sportsman going to a coach and saying, right, what's the top 3 exercises I can do? It's like, whoa, like what sport are you playing first, right? So yeah, I guess it's, I guess the good thing, at least though, on, the foundation of all of this is at least there's conversation happening with organizations that 5 years ago you probably wouldn't be having, I would imagine.
Yeah, certainly. And I think this is good. At the same time, I think it's also important to make sure that kind of expectations are not wrong, because then expectations will not be met. The typical challenge is if you kind of this understanding, like if I take some image data and I put it on Azure or something, like it takes me 5 minutes to train the model, or I can even use kind of Google how's it called, teachable machine, and I can just train my model in 3 lines of code or without any coding at all, and it's impressive what I can get out of it. So this feeling of this is easy to do, but then the understanding of from there to really kind of bring this into production, like making sure that this works at scale, making sure that you're able to detect edge cases and so on. That is something that is something that the company needs to understand. And if you have these basic conversations and you kind of have people who are kind of selling their solutions or whatever, and are not, for whatever reason, not kind of telling the full story here of what is complex and what's not complex. I think there's a high risk that in many companies AI can easily be burned by kind of failing on the expectations. So people will say, hey, we had this project and it was not working for whatever reason, and there's so many reasons why an AI project cannot work. So we don't think that AI is right for us. And there's certainly the wrong conclusions for companies. But yes, I would fully agree. I mean, it's great to have this conversation. Once again, kind of coming back to our core mission, this is exactly what we want to help the companies with, to understand the right steps and making sure that you not falling into all of the typical pitfalls that are out there.
Well, and honestly, Philip, like I can see that from my side of things as well. Like from just purely a hiring perspective, if you asked me 5 years ago what the sexiest job title is in Germany, I would have told you it would be a data scientist. And anyone with Hadoop, any kind of deep statistical analysis experience with any one of the kind of like data science buzzwords, that's where you want to go. Ask me today, companies don't usually use me for data science hires anymore because, to be honest, you can put a job spec up on LinkedIn, get 1,000 applications, and you're pretty much good, because the educational kind of transition there with both university and from like a direct education stuff like Udacity and Coursera and XYZ. I mean, there's so much information out there right now. It's quite flooded on the data science, like the pure modeling scientific side of things, right? Although there's another conversation about, well, you know, there's lots of people, but good senior experienced people are still difficult. But anyway, but on the other side, for me now, most companies that I work with, their biggest challenge is about infrastructure, kind of pushing stuff into kind of operations, and actually transitioning something away from just a model that works great on a local machine to actually this is an enterprise product that we use on a daily basis, and we can see bottom line the impact for us as a business. But I guess scaling proof of concepts generally is quite difficult, right? So from your perspective, I mean, we probably just touched on that point, but from your standpoint, what do you see as the biggest difference between organizations that are super successful, and I'm not talking Google or Amazon because they're bound to be successful, right? So what's the biggest difference between successful organizations that aren't set up for success, the non-successful companies, in terms of scaling proof of concepts and actually making it work? That's a great question. I think in the end it comes back to understanding that it's not easy, and it comes back to understanding that you really need to kind of do all of your homework, starting from like, where do I want to go with this topic, understanding what the right use case is also for the right time, but also all of those infrastructural challenges. But also in the end, kind of coming to the point of, okay, if I have a use case, who is my user, and how do I make sure that whoever will use this thing has the necessary understanding on okay, what's different with this solution? Like, okay, if I give a 99% prediction and I give it to someone who's not familiar with probabilities, like, what does it mean? Is it, and if I get a wrong prediction, does it mean that my model is bad or not? And so on. And this is really, so from our perspective, it really comes back to this point of, okay, do I follow like a systematic approach on how I do it? And we really see it. So we have, like some of our partner companies, I mean, we have our approach, what we call our strategy house, like all of the boxes you need to tick. And we have our AI journeys, so kind of how do you move systematically from one point to the next. But we actually see that those companies that really kind of care about all the points, they're in the end successful. It's the problem obviously is there are a lot of things in there, like a lot of homework or housework you need to do that is not that sexy. Like if you touch everything on data, I mean, that's typically nothing where you make a great career in a company. And it's not those kind of projects where in the end the CEO will come and say, hey, we have this data catalog and we cleaned the data and whatever, and we have the data contract set up, because it's typically not visible. But at some point, it's needed, and this is the challenge. So what we see is that companies that have this understanding, okay, it's a journey, and it's not about kind of pushing one application or one use case, that they are successful, and also that they understand that they still have, like, even if they have the first 1, 2, 10, whatever applications running, that there's still a lot of work to be done to do this at scale. And I think the one point you mentioned I find really interesting, also kind of the hiring trends. I mean, this is something we also totally see. I mentioned this earlier, and we know this cases from companies. I know one case from a pharmaceutical company, no partner of ours, but they obviously had money, so they really hired. I think it was like a team of 20 to 30 data scientists at this point. So kind of
PhD level. It was a few years back. So there's typically kind of PhD, statistical, mathematical people coming out of university, super smart people. And they all went then kind of to this team and they say, hey, I want to create my model. But there was no data, like no willingness in the organization to give data, to give use cases, and so on. So they were all hired. Obviously, someone potentially made good money in hiring the people, but kind of all of them left after some time. And honestly, I somehow fear that we're now in a similar situation with like data engineers, because companies realize that I need obviously data and I need to have the right pipelines in place. I have my models now, and then I have to make sure that my data is kind of coming in nicely for production. So hey, I need data engineers, which makes sense. But typically then many companies say, you just kind of throw the data engineers and say, hey, let's figure out and build the pipelines here. But after some time, they will also be kind of frustrated, because if they don't see that there's a systematic approach how the data governance and the data quality is improved, they're always kind of fixing this use case specific things, and then they will also leave. Then there will be whatever the next wave of people to hire. So it once again kind of comes all back to this point of saying, really understanding, okay, it's a journey that you need to follow, and you need to work on all the different parts. And if you don't do this, you won't be successful here.
I think with the hiring especially, what I'm seeing now is we're kind of in this vacuum where, especially because from an engineering standpoint, an infrastructure standpoint, that's not a one-person job, right? That is a team of, depending on how big the projects are, that's like multiple people, up to 10s, 20s of people to be working on that kind of platform and infrastructure, right? So it's a classic example of supply v demand, and the supply is far, far lower than the demand right now, which is amazing for engineers who work in that space, right? Because A, there's a ton of opportunity out there and they can cherry pick what they want. B, the salaries that they can command now is astronomical. I remember one of the first data engineering roles that I worked on in Berlin. For a senior data engineer, their budget was 55 to 60. If someone said they're looking for a senior data engineer at 55 to 60 now, I'd probably laugh and fall off my chair. But yes, B, the ability to pretty much command what you want from an engineering standpoint is there. And then C, I think that if you're a good engineer in data, you can very much career hop between customer to customer and stay very much on the forefront of technology. But on the downside is all of these enterprise companies that are trying to do this, A, they haven't got the brand that, most companies have to attract these people. B, their salary expectations are wildly inaccurate, because if they've never hired a data engineer before and they compare a data engineer to just a straight up IT engineer that's working on, I don't know, like third line infrastructure or whatever, they're going to be vastly, vastly out of scope. And then C, if they're not at the forefront of tech and keeping it very cutting edge, people will just leave, because they know that if you stand still in this market by a year, within 12 months, you can almost not become redundant. But so an example, you mentioned Hadoop earlier. I cannot remember the last time someone had spoke to me about Hadoop. And 2, 3, 4 years ago, it was all the rage, right? So, in 2 years' time, we're going to have a completely different set of skills and set of technology that we need. So, it's a great time to be a data engineer for now.
Yeah, no, totally. And I think that is the challenge. Certainly, also for the companies. What we see. You mentioned the first point obviously is like hiring great engineers. Now also, kind of all the tech companies are setting up. They're either hiring. Well, now they stopped hiring, so it might relax a bit. But I think it's clear that this is not. They will still kind of hire, and I think the German market is given the salary also in comparison to the US, it's still attractive if you're a US company and you get kind of great talent here, cheaper than than in the Valley, and for the people it's still a good deal, because if you earn more than and other companies, it's a good deal for both sides. So certainly, kind of the companies have the challenge to hire those people. I think the point you mentioned is also really relevant, because there are not many companies, even those with large AI teams by now, that really kind of think systematically about talent development or career development for AI talent. So it's really about hiring the people. But then the question, okay, how do I make sure that the people kind of stay up to date with topics? That's a major challenge. Then again, what I see as a potential, if you really get the kind of the right people, I mean, obviously you still want to work at the intersection of your core business or core process and machine learning. And with kind of machine learning skills getting more learned in basically all studies. What we certainly see is in particular fields, like if you're a mechanical engineer, you will also somehow do machine learning typically, or if you're an electrical engineer, and so on. So I think there's a lot of potential for those more traditional kind of engineering degrees. And if you work in, I mentioned this Linde example, so the colleague at AppliedAI who's driving this, he's having a background in electrical engineering, and he knows all this kind of traditional control theory. And that's certainly something that is helpful, because if you just know machine learning and you enter a field where things are already solved, it's hard for you, because it helps to understand the language and the way how things are solved. So I do think there is a potential for companies to be exactly at this intersection between, okay, we have a particular problem, particular skills for our processes, but also using machine learning. But this requires to approach it systematically and have a good talent strategy there. But that's something. I mean, if few companies are good at it. So one company, also partner of ours, ENBW, one of the large German utility companies, they now set up their own kind of data trainee program where they train their own people. They invest a lot of also money in those people, obviously still with the risk that people will leave. But still, I think it's a great thing to do because they can make sure that the people also understand their particular problems and are exactly at the point where they need them.
To be honest, I feel like, everyone is going to leave at some stage, right? So the point about talent strategies, generally speaking, is how do you acquire talent, but then how do you keep them? And I mean, if you don't train and develop and progress them, if people don't feel challenged, they're not going to stay. So regardless if you train them or not, they're going to leave, right? And if you do, they're going to leave at some stage, and if you don't, they're going to leave at some stage. So my thing, like personally, what I see in the future, especially around kind of talent acquisition, is for ML, AI, data positions, generally speaking, I think there's always going to be room for those singular target areas where we need to headhunt people, right? Because if you're looking for senior, experienced professionals, there needs to be an outbound strategy, be that direct or indirect. But I think that especially with companies like ENBV and enterprise organizations, generally speaking, if they're going to try and scale organizations quickly and with some velocity in terms of how they do that, I don't think they can do that through a traditional kind of recruitment approach. I just don't think there's going to be enough supply of those people to do it. What I do think, though, is the training and development platform to be able to cross-train people internally and expand their own skill set internally, plus external training companies that have not boot camps, but they have kind of a friend of mine ran a company in the UK where basically they took tons of grads and they worked with companies to say, right, what specifically to you guys, what are the key competencies that you need from a business, technical, and soft perspective, we'll take them on a 12-week training course and specifically train them for that, and then we'll deploy them on site for you specifically for the projects that you guys are working on. It works really well. And I think when we're talking about scale in the 10s, 20s of hires, that for me is the future rather than like kind of traditional recruitment approaches. But so I think what they're doing there sounds like a really cool thing, really. Yeah. So I guess just as a wrap up on that AI talent part, can you just give me the top 3 things companies should be thinking about when they're putting together a kind of talent acquisition strategy and talent kind of holding strategy, I guess? What should organizations be thinking about?
Yeah. I mean, you already touched on some of the points. I think first it's the understanding on what roles do I need, and in particular, like not being reactive. Like, okay, I now see the problem, so now I need to fill it, but rather kind of approach it from, okay, if I set up a team, like how do I make sure from the very beginning that I have the right people there? So it's not that kind of people start kind of doing things that are not within their kind of core competencies. And that can also be on the more, let's say, non-tech side. So you also have in a team, you have to make sure that there's someone who is good in like a business analyst role, or we call it AI strategist. It's someone who's good in going out and talking with the departments and making sure that you find the right use cases, right? And this is something, so I think first point, like making sure that you understand the different profiles and how to fill it. And it's not, I think it's good that we move beyond this, okay, data scientist role, but it's also not helping saying, okay, we need machine engineer and data engineer. There's still other roles. And I think it's good to think about, okay, who do I need? Second point I mentioned before, and honestly, there are, I don't know, not many companies out there who have a good understanding of what are kind of talent development of data talent. So typically they have kind of traditional ways. Actually, I mean, many companies are still in the process of not having like an expert track. So they have the typical kind of career. So you are either kind of you're working somewhere or you're a team lead and so on. So you're progressing by kind of gaining leadership roles. They started not only for AI to have this expert role, but really thinking about, okay, what are the requirements for AI? And you mentioned this. I mean, it's incredible how fast things are moving. I mean, if you did NLP 3 years ago, and if you do NLP today, it's a different world. So how do you make sure that you can be attractive for the people and you train the people, and in the end it's in your interest as a company, but also obviously in the interest of the people. So that's, I think, the 2 points. And the third one is I think you have to be smart on how can you, like, what can you offer to people that is something that maybe Google cannot offer, right? So I think if you're smart about thinking of your value proposition, I mean, obviously you can't compete for working with exceptional people with Google. I mean, they can hire the best, right? And they have exceptional people. You can't compete for having massive data sets. But obviously, if you have people talked about this kind of more industrial application, saying, hey, you can go to the plant and you can play around with the stuff, and you have the right environment for people that want to solve problems in particular fields and really have impact there. I think you can really have a good value proposition for talent, and I think this is something that companies should be a bit more careful about, to say, hey, you can't compete with Google or other large tech companies in some fields, but what is it that we're good at?
Awesome, man. Well, Philipp, I know we're super pressed for time now, dude. So thank you so much for obviously joining me on the podcast today, and it's been an absolute pleasure to speak to you, find out more what you guys are doing, and I hope we can push this message into obviously the industry. I guess if anyone's listening right now and they want to reach out to Philipp, they need some help with their AI strategy and deployment and execution, reach out to him. But thank you so much, Philipp. It's been an absolute pleasure, man.
Great. Luke, thanks a lot. It was a great conversation, yes, and happy to discuss those topics with anyone who's interested into it.
Cool, man.